Hello, and welcome to Common Sense, the public affairs show brought to you by Berkshire Brigades. I'm Lee Harrison, former chair of Berkshire Brigades. I'm sitting in for the current chair, Sheila Murray, who is ill today. But this is going to be a special show. I'm delighted with our guest. We have Lieutenant Governor candidate Steve Kerrigan. Welcome to Common Sense.
Thank you, Lee. Appreciate it. Thanks very much for having me.
For those of you who don't know Steve Kerrigan, and probably most of you don't, I can tell you he's worked for Senator Edward M. Kennedy. He worked for Mayor Tom, now former Mayor Tom Menino, and I guess the longest serving mayor in Boston history, and former Attorney General Tom Riley. But the big thing that I'm excited about here is that, and you may not know, Steve was the mastermind behind the last Democratic National Convention, which was just a marvelous show, and the man behind the scenes running both of President Obama's inaugurals. So this guy knows where it's at. So Steve, tell us a little bit about that and then about yourself.
Sure.
You're from Lancaster.
I'm from Lancaster, Mass. Yeah.
Okay, and that's in northern Worcester County?
It's in North Worcester County, about 15, 20 minutes northeast of Worcester.
Yep.
So it's a nice little town.
Yeah, but absolutely.
Yeah.
So tell us about yourself and how did you get to run the Democratic National Convention?
I was very lucky, very fortunate. I grew up in Lancaster. My parents are, typical Central Mass family, two union folks. My father was a utility worker for Mass Electric for 30-something years, and my mom is still the secretary at the public elementary school there, and I think will be until the end of time. My father convinces her every day that the fate of public education rests on her staying at work. Yeah. So it was a great upbringing. I went to public elementary school and all that. I went to St. John's High School in Shrewsbury. And I always knew public service was something I was interested in. So I chose to go to college at the University of Maryland, right outside of Washington, because I wanted to give Washington a try. And I actually started as an intern for Ted Kennedy 3 days before my 18th birthday.
No kidding.
And stayed with him for 14 years.
Wow.
And he taught me everything there is about public service and commitment to constituents and really just what it was about to serve the people of this Commonwealth. And so through all of that, his hand has been in my life, pushing my career throughout my entire 24 years in public life. And he was actually the one, to get to the question about the convention and inaugurals, he was the one who convinced me to go to Chicago and work for President Obama's first campaign in '08.
So you were in Chicago?
Yeah, I was in Chicago for the last few months, and I was exhausted.
With Axelrod and Pluff and all together.
That whole crowd. I wasn't in meetings with them every day, but and Pluff was for the most part, Axe was traveling for the most part. But it was great, and I was really tired the summer of '08. I'd been working hard, and the senator said, "Doesn't matter, no rest for the weary. You've got to go to Chicago and work for Barack Obama." And I said, "Oh no." I eventually, as smart to do with him was always just to agree with him and move on.
Indeed.
And so I did. And then that led to the first inauguration, which was an amazing experience. And then I actually had...
An amazingly cold experience.
It was about 4 degrees. Yeah, as you remember, you were there.
I was there.
It was very cold. Luckily, 4 years later, it was warmer.
Yeah.
And I remember the day after the inauguration, we had 8 years with the Bush administration. You couldn't be in the White House. You couldn't get in the building. So I went to lunch there with a friend of mine who had just started his job, at noontime on the 20th. And he said, "So what do you want to do? What do you want to do in the administration?" I said, "I just want to go home to Massachusetts. I just want to go." And he said, "Okay, fine." And so as I was walking out the door, I turned and I said, one thing, if the site selection for the next convention, like whoever decides with it, I'd just like to be a part of that because I think I could help with that, just, as a consultant or something." He said, "Great." A few months later, he called me up, and I was no longer a consultant on the project. I was running the project to pick the convention city. So I did that, and then the president asked me to serve as the CEO in 2011, and that's what I did.
Oh,
so
congratulations. Job well done.
Thank you. Thanks. It was a lot of fun.
Well, look, let's bring it home here to Massachusetts.
Yeah.
You're running for lieutenant governor.
Yes.
Why?
Because everything I've done in my career has sort of led to this moment. I was a selectman and a finance committee member in my hometown of Lancaster when I was in my 20s. I served as the chief of staff to the Attorney General here in Massachusetts, running the largest public law office in all of New England. Worked for United States Senator for 14 years representing Massachusetts interests. I've created 2 small nonprofits here in Massachusetts, one the Mass 9/11 Fund in the immediate aftermath of the terrorist attacks, and then most recently the Mass Military Heroes Fund, which is a fund that I'm still the board president of, and we support the families of fallen service members from Massachusetts. So this being Veterans Day weekend, it's a particularly important time to acknowledge those sacrifices. And so all of that, plus my work with the president, creating 400 or 500 person organizations. The best about the inaugural is you create a 750 person corporation in 8 weeks and raise $50 million, spend it, and then break down the organization. But all of my entire career has been about getting the job done, tackling the difficult issues that people in Massachusetts faced or people in my community did. And so when I was thinking about how I can best give back to the community, I thought about running for lieutenant governor, and I thought it was the right fit for me, and so that's why I'm running. I think it's an amazing job with such a broad breadth of possibilities. When you work in partnership with the governor, you can do an awful lot of great things, and so that's what I'm excited about doing.
Well, do you have a role model as far as lieutenant governor?
So, lieutenant governor, I always have a role model in politics and in public service, and that's Ted Kennedy, who literally did not think that there was that no was an answer to any question about serving anybody. I remember when the city of Pittsfield was going through the GE closures and the Housatonic River cleanup and all that. And General Electric was saying we're just going to put a big fence around it, and the whole thing. I sat in a meeting with Jack Welch and Ted Kennedy in the Capitol, where Welch said he'd put PCBs on Cheerios and eat them right in front of us if we wanted to. It was the strangest thing.
Some of us think he may have indeed done that.
But so it was. I remember when that started happening, and the senator said, "No, we got to get out there. You've got to start working with those folks and come up with a solution that actually helps the city stay, productive and alive, and keeps those 250 acres operating." And we worked on it for 2 years. Some other members might have said, forget about it. It's not. It's a lost cause. Let the city and the EPA and everybody else figure it out. But we were a convener and a problem solver, and that's what I've done for most of my career. And frankly, I think that's a great role for the lieutenant governor. One of the things I'd like to do, ask the governor to assign me to do, which is, of course, I try to bring this up in front of all the 5 candidates all the time so that it gets ingrained in their mind that this is what I should be doing. But I'd like to really be sort of like the ombudsman for state government and really sort of help business leaders, local elected officials, citizens alike who are having a difficult time maneuvering the morass sometimes that is state government, and help them work through those problems. I mean, there are business leaders who I've met across the state, one in particular who is a large employer in the state, a couple thousand people, and they had an issue that they needed guidance from, and they went to 2 different agencies in state government that didn't work with each other, got 2 different answers, and now their project's totally stymied, and they can't move forward. Yeah. So that's a role that I would like to play for the next governor as lieutenant governor, and that's really what I think my career has prepared me best for. For role models for lieutenant governors, honestly, Tim Murray did an amazing job continuing the liaison role with cities and towns, making sure that Massachusetts became and now remains the #1 state in the entire country on veteran services that we provide folks. His work on addiction issues and homelessness and housing issues, and of course his signature issues of transportation were really critical. And honestly, Paul Cellucci I thought was a phenomenal lieutenant governor, obviously on the Republican side, but as also a former fellow selectman. He understood the importance of local government and getting things done. And so I'd look to those 2 in particular for sort of inspiration, but the model that I always model myself after, and I say all the time, if I'm a fraction of the public servant Ted Kennedy was, then I will have considered myself a success.
Yeah. Well, that's absolutely true. And what do you know about us out here in in 413, and actually the very western part of 413?
Yes. Well, I've spent a lot of time here.
Have you?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time. When I worked for Senator Kennedy, 6 or 7 of my years in his office were in Massachusetts doing constituent work and issue and policy and politics. And so spent a lot of time out here dealing with the GE Pittsfield issue for a couple of years. I'll never forget the day after Christmas, I think it was 96 or 97, when there was a story in the Globe in Boston about crane paper, and they were trying to change the law to allow another company to get that contract. We fought that for 18 months or 2 years. I got to know Lance and Crane pretty well and the people out there in Dalton. And my family's been coming out here a long time. My brother worked for the BSO, so we spent a lot of summers here. Out at Tanglewood, but I've got a dear friend, Gene DeLea, who has been
I was going to
active.
mention Gene. I
Who,
assumed you knew him,
when you worked for Ted Kennedy and you were coming west of Worcester, you had to call Don Dowd in Springfield and Gene DeLeo once you got past like exit 5 on the pike. And so Gene's a dear friend and really spent a lot of time learning about the Berkshires out here, 20 years ago. I love it out here. It's a great place. And we spent a lot of time in 96, 97 working on Berkshire Connect, which was an initiative we did to try to expand not only wiring in schools for internet connectivity, but really helping to build out an infrastructure and a skeleton for internet connectivity for businesses and communities. And it was a big part of what the senator wanted to get done in the mid to late 90s. And so we spent a lot of time out here working on that as well, and working on Mass MoCA. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So.
Yes, I remember I'm sure you do too, when the Boston papers were making fun of of that museum out in way out in Western.
It's a wonderful place, though.
And Mike Dukakis was the guy who put the money down.
It's a great spot, though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, it's transformed North Adams.
It sure has.
And I might congratulate Dick Alcombright on his victory a couple days ago for his third term or fourth term.
I think he was elected in 2009, so this will be to start his third.
Yeah. And all the winners this past Tuesday. So. So it's been otherwise kind of quiet.
Yes.
Next year will be crazy.
Will be less than quiet.
Yes, it'll be less than quiet indeed. Well, how do you? What are some of the issues? I mean, how do we create jobs out here in Western Mass? I mean, that when you get right down to it, I mean, jobs and the economy is the foundational issue. It makes everything else possible. If people are working, they're paying taxes. We can fix the roads and the bridges and the schools and everything else. I mean, some things are national issues. And with that Congress that we're stuck with right now, things are very difficult. But what can we do in Western? What can the state do through the Lieutenant Governor's office and working with whoever happens to be governor? What can we do in Massachusetts? Not that Duvall hasn't done a great job, because he has.
Yeah.
As you say, we're number one in veterans. I think number one
in an awful lot of things. Education, energy efficiency, you name it. We're leading the pack. I do think there's one, and I speak of this very proudly, because I'm very proud of the fact that Massachusetts is the birthplace of the country, and all the things that we've done to lead ever since. I think there's one more way we can be a leader, and that is in building back the massive gap of trust between the voters and government. Because you see it right now. Just a poll of Congress, or poll about Congress, that 70% of people thought that Congress itself was the problem. Like if they got involved in something, it usually got messed up. And that's an issue for for the people's representatives to be considered a huge part of the problem. It's an issue. And we've got it to some extent here in Massachusetts, that folks they're tired of it, and they're pessimistic about government, and they don't trust government the way that they used to. Certainly, when I started out in this business, it was a much different story. And I want to start building that back. How do you do it? I'd say the number one thing is being honest with people and transparent with people, of course. Transparency and all these things, they're buzzwords and talking points you hear from probably every candidate to sit in this chair. And I'm not saying that they don't mean it. I'm just saying action items that matter. We've got to really take long, hard steps to do that. We watched the governor introduce his budget, February, I guess, with a $1.9 billion tax increase. Now, there's no doubt we need more revenue to grow jobs and grow education, which, as you articulately said, they pay taxes then and more revenue. Revenue begets revenue. But the problem becomes when you ask for $2 billion more in revenue enhancements or tax increases, and on the same newspaper is a scandal about inefficiencies in government, whether it's the EBT cards or whatever it is. And by the way, I think public assistance is one of the most important things that the Commonwealth can do for our citizens. We have to provide a social safety net so that people can, when they're down and out, they can pick themselves up. But we owe it to the taxpayers to be able to say to them, the money you've given us already, we are using so efficiently and effectively that now we have determined education and transportation are the two new silver bullets that will help grow our economy. We need you to give us a little bit more resources. I think when you explain it to them that way and say, we've gone through our entire government and made sure that everything is as efficient and effective as we possibly can, and they believe you, which might be a great many years before that's the case, then you can more effectively talk to them about what your priorities are, which is what a budget document is. It's all about prioritization. You're just telling people what you think needs to get done and how much it's going to cost and the roadmap to get there. One of the things I think we have to take a long, hard look at is tax incentives. There's a lot of data that says they work incredibly well, but there's some data that says they don't. What I want to do is take a look at every single one of them in the light of day, so that people understand these are the tax incentives that are out there. There are billions of dollars in what some people call stranded costs, whatever it is, and money we're not getting in revenue because they're going to these tax credits, and we're not sure that they're actually effective at all. And so I'd like to look at every one of them, look at their efficacy and metrics, and make sure that they're actually meeting the obligations that they have under the agreement. If they're not, claw the money back, and maybe look at the bio tax credit. Maybe it needs more money because it's being very effective but underfunded. Give more money to that. Find ways to reallocate the resources to make a real difference and have the highest level of impact. And in the end of the day, if we end up recouping a couple of $1 billion in stranded costs, then we stop having the large debate about the haves and the have-nots and who deserves the extra couple of $100 million, because we're then able to reallocate those resources. My concern always in the budget process here is we debate the delta. So we spent months talking about $480 million in the end, right? The governor had the $1.9 billion, it cut down to about $480 million. We spent a long time talking about that, how we're going to fund it, where's it going to come from, what's the money going to be used for. We didn't talk about the $33 billion underneath it. We just talked about the $480 million, which valuable conversation to have. The people need to be involved in the $33 billion as well. And when I ran the convention, I took over the convention in 2011. Previous conventions, every 4 years, you take the budget from 4 years before, you add a couple of percentage points, and then you just your assumption. You're doing this stuff on the fly. You gotta be quick. I had actually had the chance to be the chief of staff for the host committee in Boston when we had the convention in 2004. So I had to deal with the budget from a different side than I did this past year. So I was a little burnt from that experience of raising money and having other people spend it, and so and in a way that I thought was not efficient. So in 2012, I said no. Our budget's zero. Our budget's zero, and then you tell me how much it's going to cost to do that. We saved.
Jimmy Carter started that zero-based budgeting.
Hey. But it worked for us. We saved close to $25 million off of what they spent in Denver 4 years before.
Did you really?
And we included millions more people in the process. We created access for millions of more Americans to be a part of the convention. It has been said by many people, I will just quote them, that it was probably the most effective national convention of either party in the history of conventions.
Well, I wasn't polled, but I will go along with that.
I appreciate that.
It really was an amazing convention.
It goes to that.
Where did you save money?
In all aspects of budgeting, in how we built things. We use union labor, so we didn't cut corners on that, but we just built things differently. We asked the question over and over again. The most popular phrase in events like that is, "Well, yeah, we have that every year. We have that every 4 years. But do we need it?" And there's lots of aspects of government that are, well, this has always been that way. Is that the best use of those dollars? Is that the best way for us to serve the people of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts? I think the questions need to be asked. Maybe the answer is going to be yes. But then at least we've asked the question and we've talked to the people about it. I mean, it's their Commonwealth.
I know Suzanne Bump has started looking at some of these tax incentives and some of these other things too. Have you been talking with her?
She and I have chatted a little bit about it. I'd love to join her as part of that. I would love to have the next governor appoint me a chair of a competitiveness council. One of the things would be looking at this.
Is there such a thing now, or is this something you're proposing?
No, I'm proposing to
talk about it.
Yeah. So the idea being include every aspect of life here in the Commonwealth: teachers, students, parents, business leaders, big and small, local elected officials, activists, anybody who wants to be a part of it. Come up with a structure and look at every aspect of life in Massachusetts and to see how we can become more competitive. I'm a little concerned. We are number one in many things, as we talked about. I'm a little concerned that if we don't take steps to make Massachusetts more efficient and effective and take on some of these issues and some of the historic stuff that's there, and it's going to take a lot of political will to change, if we don't do that, we're going to start slipping behind some other states who are just constantly churning and making the right choices to grow and to expand and frankly to creep into a lot of our economy and some of our economic strong points. And so I think the whole Commonwealth should have a discussion about how can we be more competitive, what can we do from local regulations and how the state can help competitiveness, and how, when necessary, the state can get out of the way to make us more competitive, and really have that discussion, because Massachusetts' future, I think, depends on us becoming more nimble and effective and competitive, and I think that's a conversation. You know, governing is prioritizing, and I think the entire Commonwealth of Massachusetts needs to be involved in the discussion about what the next 50 to 100 years is going to look like, and I think it starts now.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, a number of states, particularly in the South. I mean, with them, it's you know, come and do what, you know, no taxes, do whatever you want to our land and water.
And that's not the way we want to live here in Massachusetts.
No, we want to be a little higher on the food chain.
Of course,
I would think.
yeah. And keep our quality of life and who we really are. But we then have to understand what those decisions mean to the long range, and then if that means that the result is when it's not something we'd like, then we have to readdress all of those issues. But just keep going along to get along, because that's the way it's always done, isn't the way we should be running the state.
How would you apply that sort of approach or thinking to medical costs?
Yeah.
have you given that any thought?
Well, yeah. I mean, well, first of all, because healthcare is a huge employer in Massachusetts. You know, we saw the entire country adopt our model a couple of years ago, and we're seeing some of the problems with that. You know, of course, the rollout of the ACA was botched.
Yeah, that's inexcusable, and I mean, you know,
totally.
Yeah, and what can you say? I mean, as a solid, you know, Democrat, I'm embarrassed that this has happened.
It's totally embarrassing.
Because, you know, Teddy Roosevelt in 1912 was the first guy to mention universal health care. It took 100 years to get it, and
I sat with Ted
it'll work out.
I sat with Ted Kennedy for 15 years, 20 years, with him talking about it all the time and fighting for it each and every day. So it was a great moment when we had it. Was it a perfect rollout? No. It was totally botched. It'll get fixed. It'll get fixed. I think the biggest problem is for those folks who were told that they would never have to give up their plan. That is, luckily, we don't have that issue for the most part here in Massachusetts. But so, you know, of course, Massachusetts once more was a model. I think we need to be a model in reducing costs as well, and I think we can do it. But by working together with municipalities, with the healthcare industry, which is a huge factor, as I said, here in Massachusetts, I think there's a lot of work to be done to lower costs. But I think what you'll see is when the rest of the country's catching up with ACA, with where we are in terms of 98% coverage, you'll see just in general, by volume, the costs overall will start going down.
Yeah, from what I understand, people who are complaining about losing their coverage because it doesn't comply with current laws. They have terrible plans, right? And they are getting better plans at lower costs. Right. You know, I don't know if you've heard. You probably have. The Governor Patrick has made a statement that you know, the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, is not a website; it's a value statement, which I think just sums it up marvelously. You know, Texas is rejecting it. They have more uninsured than anybody. With 22% of the population doesn't have insurance, or some god-awful figure like that.
You know, what's funny is I had the chance to be at Faneuil Hall